Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on Managing New Mobility, How to Regulate Automated Vehicles. My name is Bonnie Fenton, and I'm from Ruprecht Consult in Cologne, Germany. And on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, again, on Managing New Mobility, How to Regulate Automated Vehicles, taking place on Wednesday, the 24th of March, 2021 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Central European time. Over 50 people have signed up for today's webinar from 15 different countries, if I counted correctly. And so we're guessing that the range of experience will be quite stark, from the more or less, we'll say, risk averse or maybe more or less flexible jurisdiction with regard to automated vehicles, which I think could make things interesting. Before we get too far in, I should also mention that we are recording this webinar, so we can refer to it later. So I hope that's okay with everybody. If you're going to say something, know that it will be recorded for posterity. Just a couple of quick, we'll say, housekeeping points. I think everyone is so experienced in webinars right now, it's probably not necessary, but nonetheless, just before we get started, I'd like to point out the dial-in options are really the audio pin. In case you're calling in by phone, you may want to enter the audio pin. As you can tell, you can hear us either way, but the default setting is that all listeners are muted. And if you use the audio pin, that enables you to be unmuted in case you'd like to ask a question. So if you're not planning on talking, you're fine. If you think you might have a question, then you should take a look at the audio pin options so that you can be unmuted to join the discussion. And with regard to participating, as noted, the default position is muted to avoid any background noise. As I said, 50 plus people on the line, we can unmute you as necessary. The other things to be aware of are raising your hand. Again, I think we've got so much experience in webinars in the last year or so that shouldn't be a problem. But if you feel like putting your hand up to ask a question or just to prove that you can do it, then feel free. The third point we have, as you can see here, is the questions. And this is one other option for communicating with us. Feel free to write questions throughout if you have any. We'll either answer them individually, possibly by writing back, or sharing them with the group if they seem to be relevant to everybody. If there's something we really can't answer, we'll do our best to check it afterwards and get back to you by email afterwards, and hope that's okay with you. And the fourth thing we've got is polling, and we'll be asking several poll questions throughout the webinar just to get some input from you and to help you also learn something about the other people who are attending here. And just so you know who is here, I also have my colleague Kristen Tovas, who is running the polls and the questions for us. So she'll be in the background typing away madly as necessary. And why don't we start with the first one? Kristen, do you want to run the first poll for us, which is a really simple one?
Sure,
Where do you work?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
There we go. You should be seeing the poll.
Okay, and we'll give people, we'll say maybe, I don't know, 30 seconds to answer the question. It's a fairly simple one, I think, so we won't give you too long, but just to make sure that the tool works and also for us to have an idea who's here and where they're all from. I think it's helpful information for everybody.
All right, looks like 63% have voted already. Just give it maybe 5 more seconds so you can submit your vote.
Sounds good.
Okay, I think we've sort of leveled off there, so I'll close the poll.
Okay.
And share the results. And are you able to see that, Bonnie?
I'm not, in fact. So if you want to tell us what we've got.
Good point. Yeah. All right. So, but our participants can see it. So we have 8% from the public sector, local or regional level, 31% from the public sector, national or international level. That's the second highest we have. 8% from automated vehicle operators, And the highest is 46% with research, NGOs, and consultancies. And lastly, we have 8% with other.
Okay, would anybody like to, if you feel like it, feel free to type into the chat box what other is for you, what category we apparently missed out on. Okay, well.
So I've hidden the results.
Okay, we'll just leave that at that right now and see what we can take from that afterwards. But thank you for taking the first question. So we've got a bit of a mix anyway, which is good to see. And I'm thinking national, international level may be helpful because I think a lot of the regulation around automation is at the sort of higher levels of government. So just moving on, what you can expect today. A quick context and overview of the GECKO project. For those of you who have been following us for a while or been actively part of the project, some of this may be repeated for you, but I'm sure we've always got new people coming around, so we'll give you a bit of an overview of what we're doing in the project. An overview of some existing regulations around automated vehicles and automation ready framework, which I'll talk about in just a second, and then a city perspective with Bremen, Germany. And then we'll have a little bit of time. We're hoping for some questions at the end. So I'll just give you a quick introduction of who we have. First of all, we'll have Yannick Bousse, who is from UITP in Brussels, and he's the coordinator of the GECKO project. And our second presenter will be Busquet from Absiskey, who is a coordinator of collaborative projects with Absiskey, also a partner in the project consortium. We have my colleague Wolfgang Backhaus, who is taking us through the automation readiness framework, and particularly how to identify regulatory needs through a self-assessment. And this was as developed in the context of the Coexist project. And then from the local level, we have Glotz-Richter, who is a senior project manager for sustainable mobility, and he's working on also another project on automation, and will give us some insights from the local authority perspective on the implications of automated vehicles and how that relates particularly to regulation. So that's the deal. That's what we have planned for you for the next hour and 20 minutes. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Yannick. And the screen should be going over, I believe.
Okay. There, you should be able to see my screen now. Okay.
Yes, but they're not the version you probably want to be showing, Yannick. We're seeing your presenter notes.
Okay. Here you go. Now you should be able to see it better.
Yes, go for it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, thank you, Bonnie. So as mentioned, my name is Yannick Bousse from UITP, the International Association of Public Transport. And I will talk to you a little bit about the overall context of the project GECKO and an overview of some of the results we have achieved so far before we go into more detail with the other presentations which will follow directly afterwards. So as I was saying, GECKO, basically what's the background related to this project is what we see is a number of new technologies. And of course, today we are discussing automated vehicles, but there are also a wide range of other solutions and technologies which are coming into cities, and none more so really than in the urban mobility setting. And due to the ongoing pandemic at the moment, we even see some of those new technologies are even speeding up even further into the market at the moment. And these are coming in, but what we see then is also that some authorities or regulators sometimes have a difficult time to keep up with these rapid development of technologies, or they are regulated in different ways, basically, and don't go far enough to address different mobility sectors. and different sectors in a horizontal way. So what do we need to make the most out of these type of disruptions then? We could use the right regulatory framework conditions and also cooperation between public authorities and the private sector operators, industry, etc. So we started in this project by looking at what are these innovations that are really coming in, and then we selected a number of these. Different categories of innovations: connected, cooperative, and automated mobility, infrastructure, network, and traffic management, MaaS and MaaS platforms, and shared and on-demand mobility. And today, of course, we'll be looking in more detail at connected and automated vehicles for this webinar here. Also, what is also important to mention is that we're looking at, the project is looking at these innovations in an urban context, in an urban setting. And this is particularly important for this innovation. So we're talking about automated vehicles inside the city and not necessarily automated vehicles driving on highways, on intercity roads or so. So really on an urban setting is what we're looking at. So we started by looking at what are the business models for these innovations, and for this category here, connected and automated mobility, we looked at this for the vehicles, but also for the drones, and we identified a number of different aspects of these business models. So what is firstly the value proposition, the value creation? What is the value created by these technologies? And with this, they are able to offer environmentally friendly, economical, and efficient autonomous vehicles and drones. It is also possible to provide advanced services and technologies that satisfy under-addressed needs. How is this value delivered to end users? This could be via online channels, it could be via conferences, exhibitions, etc. And how do they capture, the providers, how do they capture this value then? Well, they will be trying to sell services, products, or subscriptions to services. And we did this using the business model canvas, an example which you see at the bottom of the screen at the moment. So once we had these technologies and the business models, then we looked at the other side, which is the regulatory responses to this. And we started to map out these various regulations. And we've now, in the project, we have put together a database of over 200, so 250 mobility regulations, which we have collected. On the left-hand side, you can see this is really globally. We have been able to collect these. You see a lot of them based in Europe, but also North America, South America and Brazil, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Australasia, Australia also. We have been able to collect these regulations. And for today, you see here for connected and automated mobility and also the various other innovations, we have collected, I believe it's 18 different regulations at the moment we have collected in this field. So once we have the picture of the technologies, there is the corresponding regulatory response, and this is something we have been trying to capture and to make a picture of. And then we also looked at what are the cooperation happening between various parties, so between private parties and public parties for these different innovations. And what we then saw is, for example, if an authority would like to provide maybe a bit more less rigid framework for an operator to provide a service, this could happen maybe via a memorandum of understanding rather than a strict and rigid set of rules, so to allow this operator to grow and to develop the business model in this framework. Or it could be a contract which is set in place. This is then indeed the more, say, the strict and rigid framework. And it could then be a software as a solution, or various different contract types which could then be set in place for this. Such as concessions and licenses, etc. Or they could share information informally between the two parties, or they could not share information at all between various parties. once we had then these various cooperation models, we were then able to look at how prevalent is this for these various new mobility solutions. And we then asked also stakeholders to this question, and we saw for certain aspects there was very strong existence of cooperation. For example, big data for mobility and transport, MaaS, because this is very much related on to sharing and cooperating related to data, or car sharing, bike sharing, e-scooter sharing, various sharing services, about cooperation related to public space. For today, what we saw is mid-levels of cooperation, which we call that for connected and automated vehicles, and also ride-hailing and transport network companies, and then some other solutions where there was a lower level of cooperation, either due to the fact that the technology was not yet in place or the service was not yet existing at the place related to passenger urban air mobility, drones, Hyperloop, and crowd shipping. So we've been able to gather the results from the first half of the project into this knowledge bank, which we have, and this is available on the GECKO website at the moment. And this includes these various aspects. So the various services, technologies, a market analysis, business models, the cooperation, and also these regulatory responses. And then finally, what we're working on now at the moment is what we have called our regulatory compliance map. And what you see here, for example, is this is an online tool, an interactive tool, which will become available on the GECKO website. And from this, we're able to estimate basically how a regulatory scheme can enable a new mobility solution to develop in a certain jurisdiction. So what you see here on the screen at the moment as an example is the compliance map for connected and automated vehicles. And what you see at the moment, for example, Australia has a darker color, which means that there is a higher regulatory compliance for this compared to, for example, Spain or Italy. So their regulatory framework allows them to better deploy connected and automated vehicles in this current context, what they have at the moment. So this will become available on the GECKO website, and you'll also be able to retrieve information such as various regulations depending on the region, mobility solution category, etc. So this was an introduction to the project for those also who are maybe not as familiar with it, and we will also be going into more details with next presentations about the regulatory frameworks and various aspects of this for automated mobility. So thank you very much, Bonnie.
Thank you, Yannick. You're the one we should be thanking for putting that together for us. So Yannick has given us a bit of an overview, and then with a particular focus though, looking at the autonomous or automated vehicles, and maybe some of you were thinking about autonomous, automated, what exactly are we talking about here? Just to get a bit of clarity, we will talk about this a bit more, but we have another poll question for you, and it is, exactly, what is autonomous transport for you? So if you could make your selections there, then we'll give you half a minute or so. How are we doing, Kristen? Are the answers coming in?
Yep, they're rolling in. We have 38% right now.
Okay, I think we can do better.
Yeah, 54. We're getting there. Not quite 30 seconds.
Yeah, I find people get faster with the polls the more you do. Takes a while to get into it.
All right, that was about half a minute. We have 73% who have voted, so
Okay.
I will close the poll. We got up to 81% before I did, so there are the results.
Okay. Okay, so driverless operation and automated driving in mixed urban traffic. Those are the two sort of highest answers, or the ones with the most takers for your understanding of what autonomous transport is. And again, we'll come back to this in a little more detail, particularly with the presentation from Bremen. But thank you for this. This is, I think, helpful just to be clear about autonomous, automated, what's the line between that? So yeah, something to be aware of. And with that, I would like to hand over to Caroline, who is going to talk about the frameworks and some of the regulations that we've found so far in the GECKO project. So Caroline, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hello everybody. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. Okay, no, so just now it should be full screen. So hello everybody, so I'm Caroline from Absiskey, which is an innovation consulting company, and today I will present to you some results related to the research we're carrying out within the GECKO project related to the automated mobility regulatory framework. So first of all, we studied the different governance models that can be employed to regulate connected and cooperative automated mobility. It's important to say at the first point that there is a strong legal barrier that prevents from the deployment of automated vehicles, which is the Vienna Convention, which is a worldwide law which stated that every moving vehicle or combination of vehicles shall have a driver. So this is a strong legal barrier. As a reminder, I just put a picture below to remind what are the different levels of automation from 0, where we are currently with light features such as speed controllers, to assisted parking, keeping distance systems, and then we are going to level 3 and 4 when we have autopilot, and we can have a driver only in case of emergency, before achieving level 5, where we don't need a driver and we don't need a driver license. So at the UNIS, there is a working group. There are working groups to adapt the Vienna Convention to the current technological context. So the regulatory body is called UNIS. And at the country level, it's important to point out that there are currently amendments that allow to carry out experimentation. So as you can see, there is a need to develop a new regulatory framework. Recently, there was a law which was released in February that involves 53 countries in order to allow the automated lane keeping systems, which corresponds to the level 3 of automation, that gives some technical requirements, some technical rules of operation in order to deploy this. And in parallel of that, at the EU level, there was the new general safety regulations that also define some technical requirements in order to have a safe deployment of automated vehicles. But so here we can see so far that there are only laws or directives when we can gather together in a category which can be binding rules. But there are also new governance models that are emerging to define the regulatory framework for this. So for example, there is a collaborative regulation. So it gathers public and private stakeholders. So it had the advantage to share knowledge, to share resources, to increase the adoption of the regulation by solution providers. It's important also to take into account the possible cons with this governance model, which can be the time. So it can take lots of time to define a regulation due to many participants, and if there is no also clear leadership, that can sometimes prevent to establish a regulation. This collaborative regulation for the automated mobility, we can mention the Declaration of Amsterdam in 2016 at the EU level, that where public and private stakeholders put in place this declaration in order to facilitate the introduction of automated mobility and develop a harmonized regulatory framework. So this is one new governance model that came up, but there is also another one, which is a regulatory sandbox. So as you know, there are many experimentations around the automated vehicles in order to test the solution, to reduce the time to market, and to have an impact assessment in order to adapt the regulatory framework according to these tests. So the cons can be the high cost due to serious regulation, because it can be due to public subsidies, which can be very high, and also in terms of cons, there are risks for consumers who are testing the solution. So this regulatory sandbox happened at the EU level. So in the framework of the H2020 research program, so there are some examples of project names. There are many more, and there will be more projects to come within the framework of the Horizon Europe to test higher levels of automation. But also at the national level, there are many initiatives. You have the example on the right hand of the side, which is the French current, in 2019, you had a map of the current experimentations and the past ones. So what's next? So first of all, I just wanted to share with you the roadmaps. So it's interesting to see that there is a different roadmap for autonomous urban mobility and for passenger cars, due to the fact that maybe for passenger car they are facing all situations, so on the road, whether it's maybe not the case for autonomous urban mobility. So here we can see that we are currently testing the automated shuttles on dedicated roads, but the next steps are to test it on mixed traffic before having something which is fully automated by 2030. Whereas for passenger cars, we will test progressively the different levels of automation with, for example, the highway autopilot before urban and suburban pilot before getting the fully automated passenger cars. But so the existing regulatory framework is good to carry out the different experimentation, to test different levels of automation, but we need something that encompasses different aspects of the deployment of automated mobility. So for example, the liability, which can be a strong issue. So who is responsible in case of accident, which is not clearly solved currently. Also, there are the insurance issues with driverless vehicles. But we have also to tackle some challenges related to cyber security, which is very important for this kind of mobility. And there are also standards that have to be defined in order to ensure an interoperable solution. And finally, we have to address ethical issues related to the artificial intelligence algorithms. So the decisions that will be made by the computer, I should say, and the new business models that will rise from the use of automated vehicles. So for example, the integration of automated mobility within the MaaS, so mobility as a service, which will be a new mobility paradigm. And also the services that will rise from the data generated from the vehicle that can be exploited for other services. So there is currently, so what we did within the framework of the GECKO project. So we gathered regulations. So as Yannick told you before, we have 215 regulations. So 18 regarding connected and automated vehicles. So the idea was to have a wide geographic coverage, but also a good coverage regarding the governance model we are dealing with. So we have here a focus beside the EU and worldwide regulations we collected. We have here the national coverage of the regulations we looked for, and also it's interesting to see that there was also initiative at the regional level, for example, in Spain or USA. So we analyze these regulations. So the full results of the analysis will be displayed over the compliance map. And we also thought about how could be the regulatory process that will be able to comply with fast evolving regulatory framework, which is a very big challenge today. So what we propose here is that a regulatory process that is put in place over a regulatory timescale, so to position a disruptive mobility innovations according to the maturity of the solution. For example, when we have a solution which is very new, very disruptive, for which there is no currently norms or standards, for example, automated mobility like 5 years before, and also currently the Hyperloop, we can propose here a set of policy instruments that can be adopted to regulate this. So for example, the collaborative approach to ensure policy objectives are achieved, and we ensure acceptance by solution providers. So this is typically the Declaration of Amsterdam. And also, so as a second step, we can think about the experimentation of the technology and service. So the regulatory sandboxes I just told you before, with binding rules to allow the deployment of the mobility solution. So here you can see a set of policy instruments that can be used to take benefits from each governance model and to avoid as much as possible the drawbacks. And finally, when we are currently integrating a technology or service which is mature, for example, e-scooters, we can have this set of policy instruments that could be employed in order to integrate this mobility solution safely, I should say. So binding rules to define conditions of use, collaborative approach for local, private and public cooperation, as well as market approach to limit the number of operators. So here we can say that there is, we are here, the experimentation of technology and service, and we have to define the regulatory framework to go over the third step. So regarding the current initiatives, so there are initiatives already regarding the V2X standards that were proposed by the European Telecom Institute. There was a multi-year project to tackle ethical issues, but regarding the liability, we have not addressed this issue yet. We have a first proposal from the UK, which put the liability on the vehicle insurance, but this is not something which is harmonized at the EU level. So here is where we are today, and yes, thank you for listening.
And thank you, Caroline, for talking us through some of this. I think it's helpful to put this sort of within a context and a framework to understand how new a technology is, and then related to that, how or what types of regulations would be relevant or applicable to use for that type of technology. If we come back, we're again just focusing, as we said, on, again, and maybe getting caught between the terms of autonomous or automated vehicles, but we have a third poll question, sort of following up on what Caroline has said. Are there any automated vehicles operating in your city streets? And we understand that we certainly have people coming from quite a different range of places. And so, as I said at the beginning, I think there could be some quite different responses here. Understanding automated as certainly something beyond a parking assist at a higher level of automation, if not fully autonomous. So to give you a little bit of definition here. Kristen, do we have answers coming in?
Yeah, we have 57% so far. Leave it open another
okay.
5 to 10 seconds.
Okay, I'm quite curious to see what the responses to this one are.
All right, I think we've about leveled off, so I'll close the poll.
Okay.
There's the results.
Okay. So yes and no are really quite similar, and not yet, but expected soon. Okay. So there's certainly some stuff going on out there. It looks like basically more than half either do have or are expecting something soon in on the streets of their cities. The follow-up question then, I don't know if not to say that we're testing if you were listening to what the Caroline had to say, but so the people that said yes, or maybe even those who said not yet but expected soon, if you can answer the next question if you have automated vehicles in your city, which approach to regulation is being used? And this is multiple choice, so we'll see some of the options that Caroline offered, and of course the option I simply don't know. But if you're involved directly in it, maybe it's something you are aware of. So obviously we'll have fewer people answering this question, Kristen, but we'll see what we come up with regard to answers.
All right. Looks like the answers have sort of leveled off, so I will close the poll.
Okay. Pretty clear so far. We're talking everything at the experimental level. So this was, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised, or maybe we can feel validated in what we were talking about, what Caroline presented. That was in the center section where things are sort of established, but not really yet, where much of the regulation is done by experimentation. So this validates what we were talking about there. Then thank you for answering that one. And I'd like to move on to Wolfgang Backhaus to take the next short presentation. And he's going to talk us through the automation readiness framework, and particularly with regard to the regulation components of that. And Wolfgang, we're seeing your emails right now, so you probably got the wrong screen going at the moment. There we go. And in we're still seeing the working mode. That looks good. And if you could say something to reassure us that you're out there, that would be helpful too, so we know that you're also to be heard. No, not hearing anything at all. Okay. Wasn't counting on that. It seems you're muted, unmuted. And we have complete silence. Are you possibly connected to the wrong device? It was working fine in our test earlier. No, still not hearing anything. No, nothing at all. We might need to get you to dial in by phone if we can do that.
Shall I continue?
That's what I was going to say. Maybe we can move on and we'll come back to this if we can figure out what's going on with Wolfgang's sound. We're still in it's complete silence, Wolfgang. So maybe I would suggest Michael will take you up on your offer to jump in ahead, and we'll move right to the city then of Bremen and see what you have to say based on your experience, and also particularly with an art form that you've been working on, looking quite intensely at automation. So we'll hand it over to you.
You see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
Perfect. Wonderful. Then I would like to take you to the viewpoint of a municipality here from Bremen, where I work in the administration for climate protection, environment, mobility, development, and housing. But I have also one leg a little bit in the development of automated transport. Here you see me being involved in the City Mobile projects in the year 2009. And what you see in the background is not a bus stop, but this is what you can say the mother of all the Navias Easy Miles and so on, of these little buses. That was the development stage of 2009. At least in the design, many things have happened, I have to say, in the technical progress as well, but it's not as far as I hoped it would be. So automation.
Michael, can I just interrupt briefly and ask if you can put your phone or whatever it is a little closer to you to be a little bit sort of louder or clearer in your speaking?
I can do that. I use my phone because internet connection today was not so good.
That's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what are we talking about? And there, from the viewpoint of a city, municipality, different things. We have all the systems of assistance, ADAS. We have in Bremen a research trial with the University of self-driving cars. We're discussing demonstrations, as we can see it here with a little bus in Sion in Switzerland. We have different world when it comes to automation in the field of freight transport, and also the icon, the Google car, this level 5 scenario, which to me appears being very, very far away. So we have to distinct a little bit what we are talking about. We heard already from in the presentation before the different levels of regulations, and of course local authorities are part, and they are linked in the entire setting of regulation. So we have to follow, for instance, directly national regulations, and in certain cases indirectly also European Union or UNECE regulations. What's relevant? We have these UNECE specifications, and for us, of course, in the current debate, there is the specification for level 3, and we see this applies for areas where pedestrians and cyclists are prohibited and where we have a physical separation. So this is very rarely the case in urban areas. This is highway application. And that's something that we have to see, that most of the development is ongoing with applications on such framework like highways. What's relevant when it comes to the European Commission? We have binding emission targets, and we have what's quite important, safety modules related to the political goal of Vision Zero. And in terms of automation, what's quite important from the viewpoint of a municipality is the intelligent speed adaptation. That means that a car knows what the legal framework is, that there's a 30-kilometer zone or 50 kilometers or whatsoever, a speed limit, and goes just as fast as that. The driver can overturn it. That's still a disadvantage from my point of view, but it's a huge step forward in terms of safety. And it's mandatory for all new models up from next year and for all new cars in the year 2024. So this will bring hopefully quite some substantial contribution to road safety. Here is something from my way back home. You see it's a 30-kilometer zone, and I took a picture of this taxi. It was on the brake pedal. It was more than 60K before, but it was not yet in the picture, in the view. National government regulation. The easiest and most normal thing for all of us is the highway code that regulates how to behave in public street space. And this sets the scene, but it's also said that individual responsibility is given. So there's not a responsibility of a technology, of a vehicle, but of an individual. And that sets also the scene for automation. We have a draft of a national law about autonomous driving, which is in the debate and is supposed to set the framework up to level 4. But there's a huge controversy about data protection and cybersecurity, and there are questions of liability. And this has also a direct link to our activities on the municipal level. For instance, to give you an example, the vehicle to infrastructure communications in terms of traffic lights. How does it work? What's the standard? How, and that's then a question of the SUMP relation of sustainable urban mobility plans, the integration of pedestrians and cyclists detection, What about liability if things don't work? Is it the communication operator? Is it the technical infrastructure? What's the responsibility of a municipality there? And of course, who pays for that? And this is our normal situation that we have to deal with, far away from what we saw in the framework for SAE level 3 in the regulation. So what do we want? And now it comes to what we can do, local and regional authorities. We are responsible for the Sustainable Mobility Plan. And there we have to see what are realistic applications in the time horizon of a Sustainable Mobility Plan. So I would say 2030, 2035. And I dare to say level 5 is not realistic in that time horizon, if at all. And of course, as a local authority or also regional authority, we give the permit for pilot trials, all within the given national framework. And there we define specific requirements for every case. We usually put it under the case of research that gives us a bit more flexibility. And there we define, for instance, operating areas or routes, give technical requirements or requirements for a so-called safety driver, that this person needs also special skills, and liability questions need to be clarified, always in case something happens. So what do we want as local authorities? First of all, quality of life, safe situations, efficient mobility. And we see here what public street space means. It's communication space, it's movement, it all comes together. And we have to see, example of Bremen, more than 50% of all trips are done by walking or cycling. So we have a lot of people in street space where the question is, how will they be detected by automated vehicles? When it comes to public transport, this is not Bremen, this is Paris. And we see here driverless operation of underground line. And the main point there, it's cost reduction. And you can allow a higher frequency because staff costs are a high share of operating costs in public transport. But this is automated. This is not autonomous. This train cannot decide to go on a different track, for instance. So there's a huge confusion with this terminology, driverless, autonomous, automated, self-driving. And we have to see autonomous is rarely the case because only in few cases the vehicle can really decide where to go. Usually it's automated, and even then it's not automatically driverless. And here we have an example. I call that driverless and automated. I wouldn't call it autonomous. And as soon as it's really driverless, we could reduce the costs and could operate such vehicles in higher frequency. Another example. One thing that we also have to take care of is the perception and the real safety and security concerns of passengers, including here we see it's quite crowded. I mean, it was all before Corona as well. But this is a situation, if there is no social control, we don't know whether this is something where we also need a bit more regulation about. If we want to have such trials or demonstrations, this would always be an individual permit. And in some countries it's easier, in some countries it's more difficult. That's also what we've learned. And we have to match national legislation and then give the individual local adaptation. And we have to clearly say, for us, when we look at the integration into sustainable mobility plans, we can see this only being a viable case for operation when it's possible to operate really driverless. That means level 4 in a special domain or level 5. And that may include also that there's a video-based steering in emergency cases, but the question is how long does it take to take over? The advantages are pretty clear. Oops, that was a bit too fast. Are mainly in the safety, which is a huge concern in terms of sustainable mobility plans, the space consumption, and of course the efficiency of transport in terms of congestion. But we see a huge benefit here in this study in the field of road safety. The development is not as fast as we hoped for a number of years ago. It's not going straight into the development of level 5 vehicles. So the question is, if we still have human-steered cars, how does it work in mixed urban street space? And here it's pretty clear. It's separated. We have more safety and driving becomes more convenient. The question for me is, will there be a rebound effect that we generate more traffic? And we wonder also why these so-called congestion assistance systems are promoted at central railway stations. So is it something where the automotive industry wants to go into competition with long-distance rail traveling? And what does it mean in terms of generating level 4 domains? Does it mean that we have to have segregated street space to allow the operation of automated vehicles? Definitely something I would like to put in question in terms of sustainable mobility plan. We see that in these famous old cartoons, this kind of domains with separation, and we see also examples where this was built. The motor industry shows nice examples how the future could look like. Here we see an example, everything is automated, and this may work because vehicles can communicate, and in terms of regulations, that would mean to ban human-steered cars. Here we have another example that you probably know, but you have to look very closely because there are different examples. Here you can see where I think it may work. And another example where you see as well, I don't know whether you can see my my mouse here, a vehicle that's still with a human driver, and we have to say that this is a big problem. So if we want to go, we would probably need full automation zones. And the question is whether this will be politically accepted. Second point, what you see here, only a few cars. You see it's based on sharing models, replacing individual car ownership. And this is something where we don't have to wait. It's available today. And this is something where we can promote also future potential of automation. Safety as last point. Here we see again this picture. We see a car, and question is, does it overtake the cyclist? Does it keep the distance and so on? So there's a huge potential with automation and the assistance systems. Here, pedestrian or obstacle detection, which is a contribution to road safety. Here we see the scenario again. You see the pedestrian saying, please stop. And what's the problem, you may ask? And it's always this term disruptive. The human is the disruptive element for autonomous transport, especially that the car, the steering the car is something that's more than transport. And the problem that we have that we as pedestrians, also cyclists, are not easy to be forecasted in our behavior for this interaction and communication between man and machine. And we can see that these safety modules are not always welcome. But there's a huge potential if we, for instance, would link these intelligent speed assistants with traffic lights and create dynamic green waves that consider also the needs of pedestrians that cross and so on. And if we regulate and say we would limit general speed in urban street space with 25 km or 15 miles per hour, because then we would have a very coherent flow and would reduce conflicts. That would be up to national regulation. It's in Germany in the moment not imaginable, but would help the introduction of automated transport and to get things like this to become reality. So that was my introduction. Don't dream of level 5, but look at the modules of automation that will help to implement your sustainable urban mobility plan. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your, I would say, maybe thought-provoking presentation from the perspective of a city, looking to a certain extent at what regulations are already there, and we can see maybe some of the ones that you would like to see put in place. Wolfgang, do you want to try and talk to us and see if you're back again? I know you left us for a moment and tried to.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, of course.
Oh, okay, that's weird. Okay, now I also will start the presentation.
Okay. We can see your, oh, it's looking good.
Okay.
Then we'll jump straight over to you.
Okay.
Yes, we've got it. Yep.
Okay.
So I'll just leave it over to you to go ahead, Wolfgang. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and also welcome now from my side to all of you. I start with the automation ready framework presentation with the question actually we asked ourselves when we started the Coexist project 3 years ago. How can cities, regions prepare for the introduction of automated mobility, automated transport now already? And actually, when you see this, these survey results, cities, of course, not felt really prepared or not well prepared at this stage. This was part of a US twinning exercise we made with the Coexist project. And I think Michael from Bremen also was one of the cities from Europe, the 54 answers. And let's hear him later, maybe how well he felt prepared for this exercise. What we did is to create an automation ready framework. What is this? Actually, we tried to create this framework to make more informed decisions for the future. And it's actually a kind of an automation frequently asked question catalog for cities, where you can actually steer your planning or preparation through this framework, which is divided in different phases. So the awareness phase, the planning, and the preparation phase for the implementation, and is built around different mobility aspects, or you could also say building blocks like policy, infrastructure, planning, capacity building, traffic management, and the user perspective. I think it includes a lot of analysis methods, technology impacts, and other best practices, but also when cities used this framework, actually it became very clear where are regulatory needs regarding these building blocks. So for example, for policy, when you start screening what is actually in place in terms of regulation, Caroline gave a good overview here. And I think also when you do this, it's how is actually this topic of CCAM automated transport aligned to our SUMP objectives. Like Michael already mentioned, what's actually the impact of CCAM on our mobility objectives for our city. In terms of infrastructure, which was a clear focus of the Coexist project, there were questions like where to allow automated vehicles, at what stage actually market share. And here I think Karin also showed the path to this answer is actually adaptive regulation in phases or regulatory sandboxing with experimental settings. What infrastructure is actually ready? We clearly found out the more structured, the better, of course. So highways, arterial roads, but there are really problems with roundabouts, shared spaces, or other infrastructure elements. And here also for an urban setting, for a city, it's clear the question, what is actually the outcome, the impact, and also there regulation should come in place. Just another example on the user perspective, of course, when you have your user engagement, citizens engagement, there are clearly the questions where you have to inform also about regulation, what is regarding data safety, and of course on a higher level then, how can CCAM really contribute to inclusiveness and safety, like it was already mentioned by Michael. Just a quick example of Gothenburg, who did this self-assessment actually with this framework, and you can see here how they rated themselves in terms of preparation. And Michael already mentioned the SUMP process, Sustainable Mobility Plans or Planning. So also here you can clearly say, when starting an SUMP process, CCAM clearly, or this framework could clearly also help to rate your, or to evaluate your capacities and resources in terms of automation readiness. A quick example, maybe what we did in Coexist and how we came then to some answers in terms of regulation. We made some, or simulated some use cases in these 4 partner cities, Gothenburg, Hammond, Milton Keynes, and Stuttgart, in transport modeling. So we integrated automated vehicles and driving modes into their transport models and simulated these use cases. And we played a little bit around to parameter settings, which is a certain driving logic, ranging from rail safe to cautious, novel, and all-knowing, and then also the penetration rate actually of AVs through this transformation phase from introductory to established and prevalent. And around these settings, we created the use cases. And for example, in Gothenburg, an urban setting like we saw it also from Michael from Bremen, there's a shared space in Gothenburg city center where this use case was simulated. Clearly with the question, is CCAM at all a way or a mode for shared space settings? And actually the clear result was, in terms of impact assessment, actually not, at least not at the moment. So shared space is mainly based on the mutual consideration, which is maybe difficult in terms of missing eye contact or signaling. So through the simulation, actually, there was more in terms of a stop and go movement of a car. There were clearly more a stop than a go movement, and this led to a queuing out of the network. So actually, the access roads were blocked then through the queuing of the vehicles here. So other infrastructure elements then, for example, simulated as a measure to improve the situation there, to put CCAM in place, was the channeling of pedestrian flows, but also here there was no further improvement through more structured infrastructure, like for example zebra crossings. And actually also the city of Gothenburg was really not in favor of such solutions, as this was clearly counteracting the shared space idea they have there. Just quick key findings. This automation ready framework as entry point to reduce uncertainties was very valuable to our cities, and we tested it already also with other cities now. The scenarios in terms of backcasting elements clearly can help to make more informed decisions, and also identify clearly what regulatory needs we have. And I think in terms of this automation ready framework, it also became very clear that we have to follow different regulatory principles, like it was presented by Caroline. So adaptive regulation, regulation sandboxing, very important, the collaborative regulation. But I think Michael also made very clear, cities have to have their say in this collaboration. And I think clearly an outcome-based regulation. So that you really meet your sustainable urban mobility plan goals with CCAM at place in your cities. This was a short introduction for the automation ready framework and also how this could lead to the identification of regulation needs. Thank you very much.
And we thank you very much, Wolfgang. We can see that there's a lot of overlaps, or I won't say repetitions, but validation in the different perspectives that we have here. So Caroline, from the research perspective of looking at the different regulations and seeing, or looking at the different innovations and seeing what types of regulations are appropriate, with the concrete example from Michael, and also the clear desire from the city perspective to have livability at the top of the list as opposed to the focus on automation. And with the example also from Wolfgang of testing this, at least in a model, to see what the possibilities are, finding that maybe it's not appropriate in that setting, but I think that's also good information to have. We have some time now for questions, and I can see that there were some coming in, either both through the chat, and I saw a couple of hands going up. Kristen, do you want to give us a couple of questions, or how should we take this?
Yeah, so we've received a few questions in the chat, and the first one that we can ask, it's really for any of the presenters. Have you found opposing objectives between national governments that foster the car industry and local objectives, for example, to reduce the place of private cars in cities?
Maybe I'll just ask the other presenters if you want to join us again. Come back on stage would be super. And then I can also see your faces. I already saw one reaction there from Michael to that question. Maybe you want to be the first one to take it?
Yeah, of course, there is. It's quite funny because I'm in a working group with the Association of German Car Makers. So, and it's an ongoing debate, and it's obvious that I quoted also here BMW saying there will always be a steering wheel. So it's a question: where is it going to? Level 5? Is it? And even if there was level 5, it doesn't mean that we have shared cars. So we know the heaven or hell scenario by Robin Chase. So it's an ongoing political debate, and there's a specific interest of automotive industry, and there's a specific interest of cities, and there are fields where we can work together, like emission reduction and so on. And there are contradicting targets, and that's especially when it comes to street space and the question of sharing, having fewer vehicles on the road.
And this contradiction comes up again and again. It's part of the discussion that we've been having within GECKO with regard to the private and the public sector. In this case, it's the car makers we're talking about, but in any private sector business, part of its goal is, of course, to make money. And in some senses, this may support the city's activities, and others it may contradict. And how do we deal with that tension? Does anybody else want to take a shot at that question from a different perspective? Nobody's jumping to. Okay. Maybe Kristen, you can check out what else we have. I also have a couple more questions that we would like to ask the audience, if that's okay with you. And the next poll question, or number 6, is: to what extent do you think automated vehicles can help to address urban mobility challenges? It comes back a little bit to exactly what Michael was just saying, and I sort of reiterated that there's some potential to be gained from this, from what's being offered by the private sector, but how much?
All right, the votes are rolling in.
Mhm.
They look interesting already. Give it another 5 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we'll close the poll. Share the results.
All right. Ah, that's interesting. Now, I would, of course, need to have a direct correlation between the roles that you play, sort of the sector that you're coming from and your responses here, but not knowing that, I can see then that, so almost 2/3, 60% of you think that automated vehicles have an important role to play. If anybody would like to add any extra comments to that in the questions, we're happy to share those. Or if you'd like to put up a hand to maybe explain what you were talking about, if this is in the context of shared mobility, again with the focus on urban that we're talking about now, or if you're seeing this in a different context.
We do have a comment in the questions actually to this, Bonnie.
Okay.
From Carlos Holguin, and I'm sorry
Yes.
if I mispronounced that
Hey, Carlos.
name. So it says the answer to your question is it depends. ... So interested to hear some more about that. What does it depend on?
Yeah, Carlos, I see your hand up. Would you like to take the microphone, or I'm just going to unmute you and you can decide if you want to say something or not. You're self-muted. If you want to, there you go. I can see you've got a green microphone. Yes.
Hi everyone. Thanks for letting me comment the answer. Yeah, actually, it all depends. As Michael said, a shared vehicle is always less polluting and and creates less trouble than a private individual vehicle. So that's what I mean with it depends. I mean, it all depends on the policies that cities put in place to implement this. For example, just regarding the Wolfgang's presentation, it just makes you realize that automated vehicles are not fit for cities, for dense urban spaces, because they just cannot cope with all the pedestrians and cyclists around. And is this what we want? They just, I mean, automated shuttles Michael knows that I've been involved in this for a long time. Automated shuttles in reality don't belong to city centers because, well, they can do more than compete with more efficient modes in city centers like buses, metros, and bikes. Even so, well, I think there are again, all depends on the way they're implemented. They can create more trouble, or they can have a great role to play. Thanks.
Thank you. No, it's a really good point. I'm seeing some pieces coming together. It's interesting. We have probably a lot of you have done it already. If not, it would be great if you would, but we put out a survey to our GECKO stakeholders just earlier this week. And one of the points that we put out there to ask for views on is this idea of a new technology could provide benefits or disbenefits, maybe depending on how it's used, and sort of how do you deal with that? Do you say we simply don't want it, or to be able to manage it and focus it to the positive? So these are some of the tensions that we're dealing with. So you've just pointed that out, Carlos. I think it's interesting. And I will make one more commercial then. If anybody has received that questionnaire link from me and hasn't done it yet, it would be super if you would fill the questionnaire out. But Kristen, do we have any other questions that are coming in or responses to this question that we were showing with regard to the role that the automated vehicles can play?
Well, there is one that's somewhat related. So this is a question that just came in from Louis Chen. Do you think on-demand autonomous mobility can also work well in rural areas where public transport cannot be served efficiently?
Now we've been focusing on urban so far. I'm trying to think who, would anybody like to take that as a question? Or I can ask maybe Wolfgang if you did any modeling with rural areas, you might be able to tell us that. Otherwise, I'll just throw this open to the panel to see if there are any thoughts.
We did, in fact, do some simulations for the, let's say, surroundings of Stuttgart with on-demand shuttles, and you can clearly see that the driven kilometers were really increasing because and was cannibalizing actually modes like public transport and also cycling, walking, and in particular the transport between smaller communities within these surrounding areas were really much increasing using shuttles. And also there we could see that it really depends on the occupancy rate. So if you only have every time one person, and we're talking about shuttles here at the moment with 6 to 8 people, if you only have one people in a shuttle sitting for one, let's say, movement, then it's actually, of course, not really sustainable.
So we're getting,
so
it sounds like
here's again the question: Can you regulate around occupancy rates? How is it linked to the public transport network?
And I'm assuming that your simulations took into account the actual public transport offer. So to
Yes.
say how good or poor was it, and you can certainly understand to a certain extent why somebody would say, there's a shuttle on demand and it will take me somewhere. Why would I wait 45 minutes for a bus?
Yeah.
So this comes back to that link between the existing service and in rural areas, which is a challenge, and what you can offer in the form of an automated or on-demand service. Yannick, do you want to take that from the UITP perspective, just because it sort of seems to be a little bit that competition maybe or something between public transport and automation?
Yes, from UITP, the position is also that we would think that automated vehicles would be used for shared mobility and basically not for private mobility. This can be particularly an issue, as Wolfgang mentioned, is this competition between different modes. And I think therefore also it's very important that, for example, we could use these vehicles to feed into the existing public transport network and feed into existing major lines in cities, such as metro lines or bus lines. So really feeding into the backbone of public transport from outside the periphery of the city, at least, I would say. Yes.
Yeah. Michael, did I see a movement that said you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. As soon as you're getting to interurban roads where the speed is more than 40, 50K, usually 80 or 100K, technology in the moment is not able to cope with that. By far not. Also, the vehicles in the moment that we see as minibuses on the road are, because of the classification, limited to 25 kilometers per hour. So there's a lot of conflicts, and also the safety of the vehicle as such is not appropriate for the conditions that you have where you'll find higher speeds. So you would need segregated connections. If you can do that you use, I don't know, former rail tracks or build something between municipalities as a connector to public transport, to rail transport or something like this, then you can do it. But in mixed traffic outside of municipalities, outside of towns, no way in the moment.
So we've got, interestingly, a bit of a contradiction there with regard to the speed that the vehicles are able to go and safe to go. Those are more urban speeds, but you're talking about a potential use in a rural area.
It's crashworthiness of these vehicles. So it's not that they make a mistake, but in case they're involved in a crash with a car that goes with higher speed. That's a concern.
Okay, so it's not a question of the speed of the shuttle itself, although at this point they're relatively slow, but the speed differential if another vehicle were to hit them. Okay.
I have another question here. Oh, go ahead.
I would just maybe add here, because what Michael just said is was also a really important result from the Coexist project, from the simulations, that actually in this early transition phase, when you have only a small percentage of AVs on the road, and you have a high share of conventional vehicles, it's actually that most of these automated vehicles, due to safety reasons, really have only this driving logic of a rail safe. So very, very slow, very cautious driving, keeping the distance, etc. So actually, in terms of the envisaged potential to increase the throughput of a traffic system or to optimize the traffic flow, actually counteracts this. It's actually get worse at the beginning, or could get worse.
Which is interesting, and Michael, I think, sort of alluded to that as well in his presentation, when you can see the one non-automated vehicle in it that threw out the entire system. So what it sounds like is we have the world without automation, we have the world of complete automation, and both of those maybe work to a certain extent, but that in-between phase is what doesn't work, which it seems to be a pretty big challenge to me, because you can't go from zero to complete overnight. So the question of how that would be done, and particularly also I would say within the context of how you would regulate that. Yeah, I'll just leave that open. Kristen, you said we had more questions coming in?
Yeah, this actually shifts the focus back to the urban level. And it's a question for Wolfgang, but also something sort of for debate. So isn't the logical conclusion with the micro simulations that automated vehicles are not adapted to city centers and will never be?
I don't think that you can say this per se. Also, other use cases showed for arterial roads and other situations at intersections, and for example, in combination with ITS technologies, green waves has been mentioned by Michael. So you can clearly see their benefits and potentials for automated vehicles. But in this, I think, in dense areas where you have a lot of interaction with other road users, I think there it might take more time than expected that we see automated vehicles in these situations.
Okay, but you're not saying it's impossible. You think it's just
not impossible. No.
Okay. Do we want to take maybe one more question, Kristen, if there is one out there still?
So we've had a hand up from Sergio Fernandez here.
Ah.
I think there's a bit of a delay on my end, but yes, we have Sergio with his hand up. So Sergio, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there we go.
Hi, I think I pressed the hand by mistake. I apologize for that, and I also apologize because I don't have the camera with me today. I'm at the office. One of the very first days I'm back at the office, and I forgot it at home. But well, if I may,
since you've got our attention,
I would like also to I would like also to provide my input as a public transport operator. And I do agree with Yannick on what he said, on which is at least the short-term application of automation in urban areas. And I think the focus should be on public transport and shared mobility especially. We at the moment at EMT Madrid consider automation as a tool to improve road safety as well, and to help in driving assistance, as a help with the driving assistance, and then from a more maybe practical point of view, also a way to optimize internal operations, especially when thinking about big fleet and how to operate them once they go back to the bus depot, because that implies a lot of time. But then if we jump to, let's say, the private perspective, as all of us may become a driver anytime, I think the main concern, at least from my point of view, is about the topics that were also presented by Caroline, terms such as liability, insurance, the other cybersecurity, standardization, and new business models. I think the point is not that much on the technological side of it. I think in specific situations, automation, it's going well and it's proved. I think that the biggest challenge is on all those side aspects which are not really clear enough and which may have the biggest implications and the biggest consequences. So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sergio. It's I think you're sort of reaching some of the same conclusions that we have been reaching in GECKO, that the technology is one thing and it's moving forward, but all of these other aspects that come around it, and this is of course where the regulation comes in. How do you manage all of this? This is maybe the hard part that needs to be addressed. And
then on top of that, if I may, I'm also worried about the evolution of regulation, because many times the regulation is developed and defined by let's say, public institutions or administrations which don't really have nothing to see on a daily basis with traffic. So we have national authorities, but then or regional authorities, but then the problem, let's say, relies on cities which are facing the biggest challenges, and that's also kind of a concern. I'm aware that there are working groups and there are bilateral meetings and all that, but I think it's kind of risky when people in charge of developing regulations are not really directly implicated in the management of mobility.
That there is a disconnect. It's interesting because, I mean, we've talked about this too within GECKO, that then where particular regulations need to be established. Obviously, you can't have a different regulation in every city with regard to how connected and automated vehicles run. That needs to be done at a higher level, but then I fully take your point that the consequences are on the streets of our cities, and local administrations and public transport authorities are the ones that need to deal with that. So I think it's a good warning for us all to take with regard to regulations and who sets them and what the consequences are. Michael gave us one question when we were preparing this. I wanted to throw one more out to the rest of you before we go. With regard to local regulation, that is, Kristen, if you can put it up, what do you think about a 25 km/h speed limit in cities? Michael put this out as an option, and we were curious to know what you think. And again, we don't know the background of each person that states an opinion here, but do you like the idea? Do you think it's feasible? Or we've created various combinations here just to understand what you think about this, because this is one potential regulatory change in urban areas based on automation, but which could affect or play a significant role in other aspects of transport in the cities as well.
Okay, the votes are rolling in.
Okay.
62%. I think we've sort of maxed out there.
All right, we'll show it up quickly then.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So if my math is right, we're at 76%, 3/4 of you think it's a good idea. But then we got that in, okay. Feasible, not feasible. And a couple of people, so a smaller number that don't think it's a good idea. All right, so we're a bit mixed here. But 3/4 of you think a 25 km/h speed limit in cities is a good thing. So Michael, maybe this is some information for you to take back to your city colleagues to say at least you got some support for that idea. Anyway, that's just one aspect of this, and I think maybe it's interesting just in that it shows us the interplay among the regulations and how regulating automated vehicles could play or have an impact on all other aspects of a city, and I think could increase safety significantly. So we're just at the end of our time now. If we haven't got to some questions, I apologize for that. We'll certainly look through the chat, and if there's anything out there, we will try and get back to our speakers and see if we can get answers to whatever is still left open. But I would like to try and keep with our promised time, and we're just wrapping up now. So I'll say thank you for your interest and attention today. You will be receiving an automatic response asking you for just a quick feedback on this webinar, so we know what you learned from it and what you thought was valuable. If you could take maybe 90 seconds it would take to fill that out, that would be super. And otherwise, I'd like to say thank you one more time to Wolfgang and Caroline and Yannick and Michael for sharing your expertise and your insights with everybody. And I will say thank you all and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Bonnie, also. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.